meant for me to eat. Lots of coal making lots of eat. Warm face, warm hands, warm feet. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Oh, so lovely sitting up so blooming still. I would never budge till spring crept over me windowsill. Before I gaze at you again, I'll need a time for tears. Before I gaze at you again, let hours turn to years. I have so much forgetting to do before I try to gaze again at you. Stay away until you cross my mind, barely once a day, till the moment I awake and find I can smile and say that I can gaze at you again without a blush or qualm. My eyes are shine like new again, my manner poised and calm. Stay far away, my love, far away, till I forget I gazed at you today. Dreams filled with desire. If you're on fire, show me. Here we are together in the middle of the night. Don't talk of spring, just hold me tight. Anyone who's ever been in love will tell you that this is no time for a chat. Haven't your lips longed for my touch? Don't say how much. Show me, show me. Don't talk of love lasting through time. Make me no undying vow. Show me now. I could have danced all night. I could have danced all night and still have begged for more. I could have spread my wings and done 1,000 things I've never done before. I'll never know what made it so exciting. Why all at once my heart took flight. I only know when he began to dance with me. I could have danced, danced, danced
Oh, that's so wonderful. You know, Dominic and I have been fighting all day long about who gets to moderate this thing.
This has been going on for some weeks,
This has
actually.
been going on for some weeks. And so
So
I...
question number one, why did you stop singing? There are more songs.
Oh, John, you're wonderful. John McDaniel, ladies and gentlemen. Grammy winner, Emmy winner. This is like I just thinking he's dancing with me. I could have danced all night. So it's funny you should say, why did you stop? I look over there. I've known him since I'd played Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, so it's been a long time. And I was 22 when I played the part, so I'm about to pass the baton to some other beautiful woman, Lauren, and excited to see this new show production. But John, you are always working on something new. You're working with Jerry Mitchell right now, right?
On a new show next month with music by David Foster, who's a great musician and producer.
So cool. That's exciting. Yeah, he's always doing something great. So.
Oh,
how cool. Oh, so even though he's over there, he's not over there. He's like, boom, energy.
And as we see, our audience knows an awful lot.
Oh,
This is a very serious audience. So
well, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So why don't we talk about kind of what each of our associations is with Frederick Loewe, first of all.
Well,
Emily Altman.
Emily Altman.
You're president.
I'm president of the
You
Frederick
are.
Loewe Foundation. Yes.
Do you need
Oh,
this a little
maybe I
closer?
need
Just
the
make
mic.
sure.
Maybe I do need the mic
Just in
close.
case.
Just
So Emily
just
is president of the Frederick Loewe Foundation, but has a much more personal connection with the man, don't you?
Yes, well, I didn't get this job honestly. My mother was his lawyer, and my mother was
for a good 40 odd years, right?
yes, for a good 40 odd
A good
years,
bit of his
and
career.
for a good part of his career, and she was, and he started the foundation when he was alive, and he was giving money to. He was actually very charitable. He had no heirs, and so he left really the bulk of his estate to the foundation.
And now you get to spend it.
Well, now we get royalties, and we spend the money. We're spending a lot of money these days on his music, which we'll talk about
Yes.
in a little while.
And Melissa, you mentioned you were the most recent Broadway Eliza Doolittle, but you've done much more on a Lerner Loewe front than that.
Well,
yes?
one of the
You've
great-
done 2 productions of My Fair Lady, right? You
Well,
did the
I
Hollywood Bowl.
did. Yeah, I did the Hollywood Bowl with John Lithgow, and Roger Daltrey played my father from The Who. Yeah, it was so much fun. It was a wonderful show too, and Rosemary Harris was Mrs. Higgins. It was amazing, and I loved working with Roger. He was. Everybody wanted to know what it was like to work with him, so I did interviews, and I had a big interview with the LA Times, and Roger worked through lunch. He was always practicing. He was always kind of nervous about musical theater, and it came out of one of my interviews, and he said, "Oh, darling, what did they ask you, you know? Tell me, how did the interview go?" I said, "Oh, they just wanted to know what it's like to work with you." And he says, "Well, tell them I'm a really great shag." So, you know, he was fun, and it was wonderful to work on it. And I did Camelot with Jeremy Irons twice, that in LA and in New York. They were for short runs, but it was at the Hollywood Bowl, so sort of numerically, it was about an 8-month or 10-month run on Broadway, because it was 20,000 people a night.
Oh my
And
God.
Brigadoon, I did a concert with Jason Daniele and Len Cariou, so Christine Ebersole. It was a wonderful night. So I love their music, and playing Eliza Doolittle, though the production I was in wasn't fully realized conceptually by just the way it all turned out with the producers and so on. The director's idea was fascinating, and Eliza Doolittle defined my life, really. So Lerner Loewe is kind of the fabric of kind of my career, especially the beginning of my career.
But having done all this Lerner Loewe, what do you think it is that makes them special or particular, if you like? Because you've done Sondheim, you're doing a Sondheim show at 54 Below at the weekend. You've done Rodgers and Hammerstein. You did High Society on Broadway. What is it about them? Because I have my ideas, but you know.
I'd like to hear what they are from an intellectual standpoint and what their sort of reputation is. Honestly, I didn't come with a bag of tricks on this one. I think what I've liked about all the parts I've played, whether it's Brigadoon or Camelot, and definitely Eliza, is the intelligence of the words, the way that they go with the beautiful melodies, but the language is so rich, and I believe that in every song, even though it's full of that playfulness, the colorful, sort of almost cheerful qualities that came with music written in, a lot of it was in the 50s, right? This music?
And the 40s.
40s and 50s, this kind of cheerful American, Sondheim is no cheery guy, it's a different, but the warmth in the music and the beautiful melodies are matched by wildly intelligent songs, and I believe that every song you can feel the character change by the end of the song, and that is not something that all classic musicals have. A lot of times it's a kind of flat line. I'm in a good mood. or I'm in a bad mood.
Are you? Which mood are you in?
Oh, what am I in right now?
You're
I'm
in a good mood.
I like being a part of things, and I like this theater. I've known, I've been around this area since I began my career, and I even knew the titular head of it all. So I very much respect this space, so I'm happy to be here.
You knew him. Wow. Good. And
I'm thinking of Uta.
Oh, you're thinking of Uta.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. No, because they as I have learned, I mean, Lerner and Loewe really did write together. I mean, they didn't. They each had to approve the other's work in order to get the song. It was a proper collaboration. And Lerner was musically trained, and so he really did understand what Loewe was writing.
Yeah, and that's not the case with all Broadway lyricists, but he did have quite reasonable musical proficiency in the 30s when he was setting out and he was writing Hasty Pudding shows. He wrote several songs for a couple of the shows. He wrote both the words and the music, and he thought at that point that was the direction he was going in, because he'd been brought up on Cole Porter and Irving Berlin. These were his heroes, and he saw himself as a songwriter, and then he realised the music wasn't so great that he was producing, but the words were good. But the collaboration has this interesting quality whereby Lerner was this intellectual, he was highly educated, he was very politically engaged, he loved reading, and Loewe was also highly educated musically. And so
classically trained, which is what people don't often
and
know.
Also had the operetta resonances in his background, because his father was a famous operetta tenor in Berlin. And so the combination of these things, I think, produced finesse. I think that's actually the difference between Lerner and Loewe, and rather than Hammerstein, who I also love equally. But I think that there's just a different quality to them in terms of how it feels and how it sounds. And so the way that they could work was quite particular. And the whole golden age of Broadway, I think the big difference between then and now was the fact that people like Loewe and Weill and Bernstein and Jerry Robbins and Agnes de Mille and all these people who were from the art world and who, one day would be working at New York City Ballet or the equivalent of that, or teaching in a conservatoire, or writing symphonic music. And the next day would be writing for the Broadway musical, and it was because they believed it was the cutting-edge form of the day, that it was almost avant-garde, even though it was also commercial and around. And Lerner and Loewe fit so well into that because of these particular backgrounds that they bring to it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why we are engaged in a brand new academic project, which really comes from the classical realm, which is to do critical editions of all of Loewe's scores, which I'm going to let Dominic describe because it really is an academic project, although we're going to give it a commercial twist because My Fair Lady is going to use the newly restored score in the spring. So tell us about what a critical edition is.
Okay. Well, we have to understand that a lot of these musicals were written for one-off events a lot of the time, as in they didn't have permanence in mind, that Broadway musicals didn't gain kind of work identities, if you like, until the middle of the century and then beyond. And so when the materials were produced, the scores, the instrumental parts, they weren't thinking about it lasting 50, 60, 70 years later.
Or being precious, particularly.
They weren't being precious, but that was part of the same thing. They were getting the performance up on the stage. That was their only priority. It was an entirely practical endeavour. But then over the following 50 or 60 years, the shows get revived professionally. The shows constantly get sent out to amateurs to perform and in summer stock. And then gradually the parts start to decay, not only physically, although that sometimes happens too, but they get copied out again, new errors get introduced. Sometimes they get copied out and simplified so that they're more suitable for amateurs. All kinds of things happen to them. Sometimes the writers decide that they might have had better ideas 20 years later, and so the sense of what a lot of these musicals were like in the 1940s and 50s has been lost.
And so in the case of the Lerner and Loewe, the Loewe scores, they were, in fact, as they came out of the pit and went into stock and amateur, they were somewhat simplified.
And of course, My Fair Lady, because of its popularity, was performed an awful lot and copied out an awful lot, and so it was all over the shop. And so the idea of a critical edition comes from classical music, whereby similarly, all of this is the same as Rossini, Donizetti, Verdi, Mozart, that they too were thinking about putting these operas on the stage for specific commissions. They weren't thinking about writing masterpieces and making them in a solid form. And so academia has provided a way of kind of getting back to the originals, because operas too were copied out a lot and ripped around and made a mess of. So a critical edition is where you look at all the sources available for a musical work or any work and put it in what you might think of as the most effective form. It's usually impossible to know what the writers actually thought, so the endeavour isn't necessarily to realise the author's thoughts, because they had different thoughts on different days, and
there's no real version.
There's no work in actual fact, or if there's a work, it's not a solid thing. The idea of a work is a sort of loose term for all the different iterations of a piece of music. Yes.
Do you listen to recordings as well? I mean, because
yes.
I would think that I can see how papers being passed around the world get all messed up.
Yeah.
You know, it gets sent to, some small orchestra in some town, and then they just simplify it. They don't know how to do it. The flute player just says, well, I just can't play that note, or something. So they just change. I can see how that paper trail gets messy, but when you want to recreate My Fair Lady this year, as you're about to get to the original orchestrations, you also listen to their...
Well, I do. We've been listening today, actually, that I have copies of the original session tapes
that's so cool.
from the cast album. So it took 14 hours to record the My Fair Lady cast album in March 1956. And
in Studio 1 at Abbey Road.
At Abbey Road?
It wasn't at Abbey Road?
Where's Abbey Road? You mean in London?
Yeah.
No, because it was here.
It was here.
Oh, but they didn't make the cast album there?
Well,
No, Goddard Lieberson, I think, was really here in New York.
Yes, this was here in New York. Anyway, so they spent 14 hours recording it. But all of the takes exist. And you can hear, and what they did when they recorded the album was to add, I think, 8 musicians to the orchestra. So there are already people playing on the album that had nothing to do with the show. And they changed all kinds of aspects of the orchestration, which was a completely standard thing to do on Broadway, particularly because, not on Broadway, with cast albums, because Goddard Lieberson thought it should be a listening experience and wasn't particularly interested in preserving the show. I mean, it was a kind of commercial thing, and also he came from a classical music background, so I think he was thinking, people don't want to sit at home and hear dialogue. So in all these My Fair Lady songs, they cut the spoken lines. So, but on the session tapes, you can hear that because they're doing it all on the fly very, very quickly, that take number 1, very often they forget to miss out the spoken line, and so then they have to start again. But a lot of them...
You catch it, yeah.
I can catch it, which is fun. But also, details of the orchestration were changed. One of them is that in I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face, they... accompanied the melody, I think, of the first refrain with a solo violin only for the recording rather than the whole section. And so there's confusion on the first take about how this is going to work, and he's playing it up an octave, and they have to stop and put it down. And you can hear in the chat that's going on in the studio that they're just figuring it all out.
So you're an archaeologist.
Well, that's right. Yeah. That's right. And it's going through the layers of the various scores as they existed and trying to put together. And I think the goal in our case is probably to get as close to what might be the authentic Broadway version as we can.
That didn't happen at Abbey Road. Yeah,
no.
Probably not. I'm connecting someone else.
I know.
I
was
knows.
Thinking,
there's something I'm thinking.
Am I missing something?
No, there's something in my head that's wrong about it. But there's something happened in that room relating to Julie Andrews or something. But
yes. But there's also the West Side Story thing, whereby there's a letter from Sondheim to Bernstein, who was not there for the recording of the cast album of West Side Story. And so
Wasn't there?
No, he wasn't there.
there.
I think he was
Intentionally? I mean.
Well, I think he was intentionally in Israel conducting.
Oh, I see.
And so he wasn't there to supervise what they were doing. So again, it's really not a document of how Bernstein thought the music should go. And Sondheim writes his letter to Bernstein explaining why various tempos have changed. And it's A, I think, to get it all on the record, and B, because it would have sounded too slow on a record, but the way they do it on the record is too fast for the theatre. It might be the other way around.
Something like that. Oh,
But again,
interesting.
it means
It's
that you
different.
can't use it as
Yeah.
a document for the
for
tempo.
the production, the critical edition for the stage.
Yeah.
And all of which is to say that
So cool.
this My Fair Lady
Is the real
is going to be, we like to think, is going to be the first time since maybe the West End closed, that the music is as it was,
Oh, well, they changed it for the West End.
and they changed it for the West
So,
End.
yeah.
So can't win. So anyway, so it's really very exciting, and it goes without saying the Lincoln Center people are pretty excited about it too. But one of the things Dominic is here to do is to talk to them about it, because it's
Whether they like it or not.
whether they like it or
Yeah.
not. Exactly. So
Good.
so we're very, and we're doing it with each one of the scores, but a
Well,
little more slowly.
My Fair Lady is one of the easy ones to do. Camelot is an absolute nightmare. And the foundation has kindly funded some doctoral studentships. So I have PhD students working on several of these shows. Katie in the audience is doing Camelot, and she's about 6 weeks in and is just discovering what a nightmare Camelot is, because it opened on Broadway and then was changed several times on Broadway. And then when it opened in London, it was a completely new version. So the materials for Camelot are particularly difficult. And in actual fact,
And it's not
deciding-
clear what in fact the goal is yet.
no.
Whether or not the Broadway version is what we even should be aiming for.
Which Broadway version?
Which Broadway version?
Yeah, because it opened in Toronto and was extremely long, and then got cut down gradually in Toronto and Boston, and then into the New York previews, and then was cut down, I think, about 3 or 4 months in, and then changed again when Catherine Grayson came in.
I
Took
think
over
it's
from
healthy
Julie
what
Andrews.
you're doing. I think it's
Is it?
good for the shows.
It is.
I think it's true. I think you're gonna get it's like spring cleaning for the shows.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
you're
exactly.
getting a nice clean start, and then the people should do whatever they want again.
Well, well, you know, you've hit on something.
Yeah, but I think we need to
Because
reboot, but then we need to say
have
that's it.
open art. If somebody knows, I don't know quite what I'm talking about, but
You
we.
do know you're on
but
film.
no, but Bruce
on
Pomahack, who is in the audience, who is the Rodgers and Hammerstein musicologist for a long time. We've had conversations about this, and I think we've talked about how you could make the architecture of this project open, so that major productions that follow would be able to be available, and so you could see how people mess it up again, Start messing it up,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
not,
document.
or improving it.
We all live in our time,
That's right.
and we have to think about the people who 100 years ago dealt with Wagner's operas, and then all of a sudden there were new directors and new designers and a new psychology. How do we deal with that when we have to talk about what did Frederick Loewe and Alan Lerner think? There's going to be a wonderful production of Brigadoon this weekend. Hopefully, many of us will be able to go and see.
That's right.
It
And if you
keeps going, it will change, hopefully, forever.
No, and the
It'll
idea
be
is to try to find a
what we
spot
love.
to, do you know, I had a lovely conversation about this before he died, with Michael Friedman. And he was very interested in the same thing you've been talking about, which is to be able to keep the architecture open so that subsequent productions would be able to be monitored, which is kind of an interesting idea. Because no doubt Ted Sperling, the music director at Lincoln Center, is going to have his own views
That's okay.
about
He's allowed to have views.
yes, about
We
about
want
the
a
music.
person, not a robot. Yeah.
We want a person, not a robot. Exactly.
But we want a good, clean start.
But
Yeah.
we want a good, clean start.
like it.
It's a nice,
Yeah.
it's a lovely
Can
idea.
you tell I have 3 kids? Get organized. But it's good. It's like Wagner matters. Like listen, all these directors and so on in history, it's wonderful. They noodled with it. But we do want to know what I want to know if I were into Wagner, which I'm not. But I'm perfectly interested to know what was
Right.
his.
Right.
And this
What was
is
the
wonderful.
closest we can
Yes,
get?
I think
Exactly
it's
right.
very
And that's
healthy,
the idea.
important work, especially in this futzy time where everybody's changing everything and so on, a computer. Get it clean, and then all the subsequent things will always be referenced against it.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's
it's so good.
and
And
so
we must do it soon.
No, and
because
that's
this is
it.
the perfect
No,
generation
we're
to take
doing
control.
it. We've got graduate students like
Yeah, it's
Katie who's in
happening.
the audience, and she's working hard.
Yeah,
And,
but also it was important to me to have the students because it means more people will be trained up to do the activity, which almost no one knows how to do. I mean, I've
Yeah.
never done it before,
Yeah, you're so
doing
young.
My Fair Lady.
Look at you.
It's not to do with my youth though, it's just not in academia actually. Critical editing is not in fashion right now, and it's not taught very much at university. So, and there aren't really very many models for doing it for Broadway shows because obviously there are particular problems with Broadway shows. So it's great to have 4 other people,
Yeah.
also young, training up to learn how to do it.
And doing it for someone like Lowe, who was classically trained, when the music feels like it's worth the trouble, you know,
Oh,
which
it
is
sure
which
is.
is nice. I
But
mean,
he also had a concept of what he wanted. So what went on the stage and in the pit wasn't a coincidence. There are composers from this era where they might have written nice tunes, but then handed it off to the music team who did whatever. But there's a sense of authorial control about Lowe, who clearly could sit there in the audience and say, you know, get rid of that instrument or add a chord here or do it slower here or you know, make changes even if he hadn't physically written out every note of every instrumental part.
And you're
He knew what he
trying to
wanted.
get to what his best idea and most recent idea was per
Well, the thing about a critical edition is that there's the music and then there are appendices with the other bits.
it is footnoted to death.
It is footnoted to death. But then there's a critical report in which you explain all the different versions and all the changes that were made so that someone performing it can have a completely open view. So you present one version, but performers and conductors can come along and say, well, I actually want to do some other idea that's documented in the critical report. So it does pin it down, but it also opens it up in a quite a good way. So also in the audience is Amy Ash, with whom I've been
Oh.
editing
That's so nice. I'm so glad.
the complete lyrics of Alan J. Lerner, whose centenary it is in the coming year. And so we've had the same approach to the lyrics, whereby we've been through every version of every script of all of these 20-odd shows that we could find and have provided in footnotes all the changes. And in the case of, I think the most extreme one was in Take Care of This House from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the word bandits. There were 7 other words that it was going to be in different versions, and that was the level
Bandits?
of bandits. If bandits break in, sound the alarm.
It's
But-
rather relevant.
Okay, let's not go there.
Sorry.
But there was a back and forth between him and Bernstein about what word it should be, and so again, there's a sense of pinning down the sort of the ultimate version, but also opening it up with all the sources, which leads us to your next song.
He's shared with me. How did we meet, by the way? We've met before. How did we meet? We were
So
set
you
up.
wrote to me.
I wrote
You read
to
my
you?
book,
I read.
and we met at the Victorian Albert Museum. Remember?
That's right. He wrote a. What's your new book? You have a new book coming
This
out,
is
right?
the lyrics book.
Do they know about it?
I just mentioned it.
Okay, okay. Well, you didn't pitch your book. When did your book? Remind me. It comes out.
It comes out in February.
February, and
Yes.
it's called.
The complete lyrics of Alan J. Lerner.
Excellent. So we're all going to buy
It's
that.
Really big.
But I had read his book on My Fair Lady, and then
Oh, which should be pitched, which is called Loverly, which is a wonderful book.
really interesting book.
Interesting
and
book.
really this kind of
And you're
breaking
in
things
it.
down. I happen to be in it. But as our friendship took off and we met at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and had tea and so on, and we just got to chatting and really enjoying each other, he's shared with me that a lot of music was cut from My Fair Lady. And that there was a process of getting to all the great songs, but I Could Have Danced All Night, for example.
Yeah.
There were 3.
9.
9.
9.
9?
He's only told me about 3.
What time is it exactly? Yeah.
Would you like to hear one of the cut songs? Okay. And do you want to say anything about why they cut it, or should we do it after?
Let's do it after, and then
But
they'll be
it-
astonished.
Let me just for myself be reminded, is this after I've done the Rain in Spain? And
This is I could have danced all night.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Okay, so
Mrs.
the moment
Pierce has
after-
said, go to bed, Eliza.
Right, she's found her voice and all this excitement, and we're going to do this song instead. Where are the words I long to hear? And where are the words I long to say? Why can't I open my heart and let them fly? Oh, why are we all so shy? Why are we always afraid to be the one who holds out a hand and leads the way? Shall all the love in the world go wandering silently by, leaving us here year after year to shine? Why are we always afraid to be the one who holds out a hand and leads the way? Shall all the love in the world go wandering silently by, leaving us here year after year to shine, 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 shine,
There was as you find out if you read Dominic's book, which is a really interesting mixture of an analysis of the music and the story and how the show got done, My Fair Lady. You do find out that there was a theme to how the songs they wrote and then why they discarded them over time, which is that they slowly got rid of the romance.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the pattern with the whole genesis of the show, is that they started out with conventional Broadway songs and conventional Broadway ballads and a lot of dialogue about Higgins and Eliza being in love. And then as the years went by, it all gets chopped out so that it remains very, very ambiguous in the end what the relationship between them is, so that you can play it in different ways. But this song, I think, was about the penultimate choice for this position, and they really clearly liked the song because they gave it to Julie Andrews to learn when we were in
There's a story.
we were in Sydney last year working with Julie on a reconstruction of the original production at the Sydney Opera House, and she knows the song, and we gave it to the cast to sing to her on the day that she was leaving, having directed the show. And so there's a thing on Instagram, if you go searching on the internet, where they sing it to her, because until then she thought she was the only person in the world that knew the song. She probably doesn't know that you do.
Actually, I'm pretty friendly with her too. I'll chat with her about
You should
that.
tell her.
You should sing it to her.
Well, it's interesting because Eliza, I'm not sure, is someone who is at a loss for words. And that's a song about being at a loss for words. And I'm not actually sure that that's who she is. So as I was singing it just now, I was thinking, she's finding her shyness, if that's what's happening, because, which is not really what the discovery of your voice traditionally would be. This would be like a Sondheimian inversion, if it's sort of like as she finds her voice, she finds her shyness. Like I think that we would throw that out. But as I was singing it just now, I realized that the voice of the character of this song is saying, not only, I mean, obviously Higgins is probably a man who's shy and has a hard time expressing himself, and this is a very sophisticated than a female saying, why can't he show himself
Repressed,
to me? Why can't he show himself? Yeah, but where are the words I long to hear, that I long to say? You know, so it's like she also feels repressed. So it's like two repressed British people, and I don't, which is, I'm sure there are many of them, but I don't think they're Eliza and Henry.
Right.
I think that Eliza knew how. She had it all. She was very loquacious and confident and smart. She was just not well dressed and properly phonetically well spoken. But she had life force, always flowing.
Right.
And I don't know that she'd have sung that song.
Right. No, it's there. It's
It
really
certainly musically doesn't really go with the score. Although Trudy Whitman, who was the dance arranger of My Fair Lady and so many major musicals like Carousel and The King and I and Camelot, did a Begin version. So it's kind of upbeat in Latin to try and make it work. And if you think about it, that's a sort of bridge into Where I Could Have Danced All Night goes, as in that's more upbeat.
Well, and we just did this, right? That just ended.
Yeah.
So we were a little
So
in
we're in that
Spain.
zone,
We're in
yeah.
that zone.
But thinking about what you were saying, in the penultimate scene of the show, when they're at Mrs. Higgins' house, they actually talk about what you've just been saying, as in they don't really know how to... Their relationship becomes awkward, doesn't it? That's what the second act of the show is about. It's about how she can speak and do everything now, so what are we going to do now? And they don't know how to categorize their relationship. And he says, what do you want from me? And she sort of goes, well, I want a little kindness. It's a sort of very curious
It's
encounter.
how she's treated. What she wanted to change was how she was treated.
Yeah.
I don't think...
So what did Howard Davis think was going to happen at the end after the curtain went down? Did he ever tell you?
Well, Howard Davis...
who was the director
of the production that I did, and he died this year.
And it was the last revival of...
And it was the last revival, and it was a very smart idea overall. His vision of Eliza was, I was 22 when I was cast. I had just graduated from Yale, and I was sort of like an intellectual. And I think what he most wanted was my height and my body type. He wanted me to look like a young man. He wanted me to be strong and smart and free and dressed like a boy. And I wore clothes like Charlie Chaplin, and she was very facile on the street, very much able to hold her own as in the marketplace, as it were, of Covent Garden. And she had no shy qualities and skirt and this and with the flower, not at all. Absolutely selling, this thing is worth that. And this is what it's worth. And so just very at ease with herself. And as she saw the opportunity to learn, and she overheard, she says, well, here I am, ready to pay. You know, what is the lines? It's been 100 years since I said it. Was like, you know, well, and he treats me as if I was dead. You know, she wants lessons. So here I am, ready to pay. Well, she doesn't want any favors. So she just wants to buy something, which is lessons, because he said he could do it. He said he could teach me. I want to be a lady in a flower shop, instead of selling flowers at the corner of Tottenham Court Road. Well, he said he could teach me. So that's it. Like, I don't want anything. Like, he's getting mad at me about what? You know, I'm at the door. I want to buy something. Can I buy this? So it was like she was at ease with herself. And as she got to know how to speak properly, and he put her in the bathtub. We put the bathtub scene back from Shaw.
And she's sort of mortified by that, but then suddenly I'm in the female clothes, and I have this bust and this shape, and I look all nice, and so she kind of enters her gender for the first time. So Howard Davis had some interesting ideas about gender, and also about science and sort of social engineering, the idea that this man scientifically thought he could make her. I think concurrently with Shaw's play was the Frankenstein story had been written. So this idea of science making a person, sort of the important thing. So there was something a little darker and more scientific about the production. So Eliza walked into also this laboratory. A lot of people made fun of our production because it looked like Frankenstein's lab. It didn't look pretty. And as it got closer to Broadway, it started changing colors, like pink and purple, and flowers started appearing on the stage. My Charlie Chaplin outfit was purple when I opened on Broadway.
You were under some pressure from other...
Well, whatever the pressures are, but you should let a great director do what he wants to do. But, you know, it just, that production was so smart. So may I direct it one day. I loved what he did and I got it. But anyway, it was sharp and smart, but it was just too dark. And that's, you know, people said it was the darker side of the fairy tale. But it's actually really a wonderful idea that she fell in love with him.
So she did fall in love.
I think she does fall in love with well, I think she does fall in love, and I think they do have a meeting of the minds. But I think that at the end she feels trapped, you know, much more than you in other productions, because she's now really only fit for the marriage market, and she had been perfectly adept at the marketplace and not been so. So I feel she's even further trapped because there's some gender issues in there too. I do think that they had a great meeting of the minds. I think what he did was he abstracted the end. There's this phrenological head, the sort of symbol of science, and Higgins is sort of tormented by Eliza's absence, and he enters this abstract space, sort of the set was meant to be very expressionistic and unusual and not realistic. So I don't know if he's actually saying, did she come back? But he sits like this, and he's at the phrenological head, and he's thinking about Eliza. And I come around it, I'm standing behind it, and I come around it in this sort of symbolic space. So either I'm coming into his conscience, or I'm coming into his actual space. It doesn't matter, but then there's this repartee. So something changed in his psyche, and that's what Howard wanted you to understand. More important than whether they get married and live happily ever after, but that there's been a shift, and that she's in his head, and that these two people are inextricably, surrealistically tied to each other. Whether they walk off into the sunset together, they are bound. And we see them in a symbolic space, which almost in a weird way is more eternal than just a literal marriage. So that's
great.
I think it was beautiful. So
It's very problematic, because I mean, we've all seen productions where they kiss the end, and sometimes, I mean, they're all over the map.
Yeah,
so.
The Cameron Mackintosh production ended with the Higgins and Eliza folding their arms, which was very platonic, and laughing as if it had all been a joke. I mean, it's just interesting how it is open enough so that you can...
Yeah, I think that's what we
it.
had it in a sort of a psychic, symbolic space, but we were together. The image was together. It wasn't this.
Yeah.
We didn't play that. We played a kind of simpatico.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to ask,
Yeah,
That's,
that. It wasn't cold. It actually wasn't cold. It was intelligent, but it wasn't cold. Those things get tangled sometimes. Not with you, of course, being an intellectual, but anyway, that was our story. But it's interesting that My Fair Lady is so beloved, critical edition. It's really hard to stray, you know, unless you're going to be really free, and everybody knows we're doing this the weird way.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't
At
think,
BAM.
I think that,
You know?
yeah, right.
Yeah, we should have been at BAM.
Right, we should have been at BAM. No, I think, picking Lincoln Center Theater to do it, and Bart sure was in fact not picking the weird way. I mean, I think we were picking we were hoping we were picking
Oh,
a
it's going to be
smart way.
gorgeous.
It's going to be.
We were just meant for BAM, is all.
It's
Yeah,
gonna-
this
yeah,
one's going to be
right,
perfect.
right.
That's why I like everybody to be. You know, I tell my daughters I want them each different, and to enjoy being different.
Yeah, exactly. So we're really we're very excited about it, and the castings in train, and
I think it's cool.
yeah,
You have a Higgins who's younger than the Eliza.
we have a Higgins
I
who is.
love that.
You know
It's
that fact,
great.
did you? Yes,
Yeah.
we were sort of.
Yeah.
We were thinking they were roughly contemporaneous in age, but
Yeah.
yes, he's
Yes,
actually
fabulous.
a little bit younger. But
Yeah.
but he's great. He's great, and
Good.
it's going to make the dynamic's going to be a little different.
Yeah, fresh.
So,
Great.
fresh.
It's a great start.
So,
yes.
So what other Lerner and Loewe things have we got to look forward to, other than My Fair Lady?
Well, Brigadoon is happening right this
Well,
minute.
Brigadoon is
right?
happening any minute, exactly,
It's
this
brewing.
week. This week, the dress rehearsal's tomorrow, and the opening is Wednesday, and there's apparently not a ticket to be had, which is very exciting. So we're looking forward
I
to
have
that.
one. Uh-huh.
And you have one. Yeah, you could probably turn it into a lot of cash at this point. And then one of the things we're very excited about is,
I need to step aside for a moment. I have to pick up my daughter, who is dancing in the Nutcracker at Lincoln Center and has rehearsal. So excuse me a moment. I will say my goodbyes. Maybe I should say my goodbye now,
Yes,
because it'd be weird to come back and forth. So bless you.
Oh.
So,
Melissa, thank
ciao,
you.
madame.
It
Best
was
of it.
wonderful.
Ciao,
Thank
ciao.
you. That was lovely. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
So we thought we would end with some Q&A from the audience if you have any questions.
Oh, Brigadoon is being done at City Center, and which is a long tradition that they have of doing Brigadoon. I mean, which they've been doing it steadily for many, many years. And Eddie Villela used to do the sword dance, and he would just come back and do it every few years. So, yeah.
I seem to remember that there was I know it sounds crazy, but a TV version of My Fair Lady, and I think Julie Andrews was in it.
There was a TV version of Brigadoon, which they have not. Yes. Oh, sorry. There was a TV version of Brigadoon that was that hasn't been generally released. They actually broadcast it at the Museum of Television. But it hasn't been generally released. I forget which network it is. But
yeah, I think maybe you're thinking about Cinderella. So Julie Andrews came out.
Maybe it was just Ed Sullivan doing the.
Oh
Yes.
she did
various
bits.
scenes.
She
Which
did
was-
bits of it on the telly.
which was
I
very.
danced all night,
Mhm.
but it was very much.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, that's right.
Anyone
So
else got
anyway.
any questions? We can't see you very well, so you'll have to
You'll have to shout.
just shout a question at us.
What's up? Is there enough to do a critical edition, or is that sort of a lost point?
Good for you.
Yes, good for you. This is Richard Norton, who knows more about Frederick Loewe than I do. I mean, the audience is full of people that should be on the stage, really.
Yeah, hello. I'm so glad you're here.
So with What's Up, most of the songs have survived in piano vocal score, so in the most basic form in Frederick Loewe's hand. But two of them were sold at auction in 1999 to private collectors, I assume, and so they're lost to the world.
You mean the actual, no other copies exist?
No other copies exist.
Oh my God.
Well, I've been looking for 11 years.
This
and I
is
can't
before
find
my
them.
time.
You wouldn't have had enough money.
It's
Emily.
true, we wouldn't have had enough money at the time.
Which two, so everybody doesn't look for?
From the chimney to the cellar, and Love is a Step Away. There's geeky knowledge for you. And I think one of those was actually cut before Broadway, but from the chimney to the cellar was in the show.
Now, What's Up was when the aviators land in the girls' boarding school?
Yes,
Yeah.
the less said the better. So in Sheffield, with my students, I did a concert which included, I think, 9 of the surviving songs, and we did new arrangements, and they're actually pretty fun. They're more like they're almost like Burton Lane songs, some of them. You're going to hate me for that. They're not particularly Frederick Loewe-ish, most of them, but they're fun. However, as far as I know, unless you found another one, there's only a very early draft of the script surviving, which is pretty terrible. And it's not clear where some of the songs go. So it's absolutely impossible to do a critical edition of What's Up. However, I do hope we can publish eventually what little there is left of it, because there's probably about 50 or 60 pages of piano vocal score, so that would be fun to have. But it's funny, either they deliberately destroyed everything, or everyone involved with it thought it was so bad that it should be destroyed. Who knows? Similarly, there's no complete score for Life of the Party, which was the first Lerner and Loewe collaboration, which didn't reach Broadway.
Oh, it closed in Detroit.
Yes, and many of the songs survive in some form. One of them is called The Hot Gavotte, which has the same tune as the Ascot Gavotte. So there is this link forward. There's also a song in What's Up called Give Us Air, which I suspect Lerner, so the music hasn't survived for that, but it's in this draft script. I suspect Lerner, that it was set to the same music that Loewe provided for The Little Prince for the song I Need Air, which was their last musical. So I think that a song from their first musical made it into their last musical, which is
They were economical.
Yeah. There could be a critical edition of The Little Prince. It doesn't belong to Lerner and Loewe because it was a work for hire, so it belongs to Sony at the moment. So whether that ever happens is debatable, but the complete orchestrations from the film survive. I've got copies of them, so that one could happen. There's also Great Lady, for which, curiously, the instrumental parts survive, but I'm not sure that all the vocal parts survive, as far as I can tell. So I would have to sit down for many days to work it out.
That was when George Balanchine directed it, was it? Or?
Was Balanchine?
Yeah, and
Great
Jerome
Lady?
Robbins was in the chorus, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and the one we're really excited about, though, is The Day Before Spring, which we
Really?
mustn't let the evening go by without mentioning, that we're really happy about it, because the original score and the original book were found by Dominic, and
Well, not the orchestrations, sadly,
not the orchestrations, that's true, but
everything else.
But everything else.
Yes.
And the songs are really very pretty. And the book, for a book that was written by a 20-something-year-old learner, is actually quite sage. So we're really working on getting it into shape, because we really want it to we want it to be part of the catalog.
Yeah, so it will be made available for rental at some point.
Yeah,
in the
and if
coming
anybody
years.
wants to hear some of the songs, there's, on YouTube, you can hear Thelma Carpenter do a really fun version of, what's it called?
Is it My Love is a Married Man or A Jug of Wine?
A Jug of Wine.
Right.
And you can also hear Derek Jacobi and Anne Reed, who just did the orchestrations are a little soupy, but it's actually quite sweet, of,
You haven't changed it
You
at
haven't
all.
changed at all, sorry, I'm blanking out. Which is also just, you can find it on Spotify.
It's a really fine score for The Day Before Spring, and again, there are bits of music in it, and even bits of lyrics that made it into later musicals. There's parts of Paint Your Wagon, My Fair Lady, Camelot and Gigi in The Day Before Spring, very tiny parts. So there's something about the work that indicates that Loewe in particular had reached the benchmark in terms of creativity, because the stuff was good enough to reuse, and clearly there wasn't a future for it. So he didn't have a problem with reusing the middle eight of one of the songs in On the Street Where You Live, which is the really striking one. And also one of the songs became the verse to the title song of Gigi, which won an Oscar. So it's kind of interesting what the consequences of some of these borrowings were. Good. That was a very lengthy
Emily,
response.
what captured you? Because you are so important, both of you are so important to what is going on with Lerner and Loewe now. But I'm curious to know, because although I know both of you, what caught you?
But, you know, I grew up listening to these songs and singing them to everybody's horror at home when I was a kid. And I mean, I was devastated when I found out that Camelot wasn't a great success at the beginning. I mean, so this was, to me, this was just so fun to be able to listen to the music.
But you, in your world, you heard it all. You were part of all of it. What was it, Lerner Loewe? What was it?
Well, it was better. You see, if you actually are the daughter of someone who is a working lawyer in the theater.
And your mom was.
And she was. Now, granted, she represented Kazan, she represented Jerome Robbins, she represented a whole bunch of people, Mary Martin, but she also represented a lot of producers who had a lot of flops. And so we would get dragged to the theater, and we would learn to clap, and when no one else was, anyway, and this stuff, the Lerner
Did you
and
see
Loewe
My
stuff.
Fair Lady as a child?
I missed that one. I'm not quite that one. I did. No.
Careful.
Careful. I did go to see. I did see Fiddler on the Roof.
Cabaret? Man of La
Cabaret,
Mancha.
Man of La Mancha. I saw, yeah, because Albie Marr and Joan Diener were her clients. Yes, but
Basically,
But was there something about Lerner and Loewe that was special?
well, I think I did find, I mean, just books and the music. Camelot in particular, I mean, I was just ended up being a particular favorite. I ended up reading the Once and Future King, and it was. And now, of course, I actually, if driven to tell which is my favorite, I will say Paint Your Wagon. Now, it may have been because I spent a year of my life doing that album.
And you made that fabulous recording.
Thank you. I paid you to say that, but still.
I always think it's about the romance.
Yeah.
But Dominic, what captured you?
I think because I had two passions and still do. One is kind of classical music and opera, and the other one is Broadway. And the finesse of Lerner and Loewe is just noticeable. I mean, in Shy,
elegant.
Despite all the problems we might identify with it, the harmonies are amazing, aren't they? Like it's hard to think of another Broadway composer that could do what's going on in that song musically, that someone untrained probably wouldn't notice. But it's just so rich and sophisticated, and he's so good at going through different keys and chords at ease. I mean, it just seems to have happened.
Chords sounds academic. What got you in your gut?
Well, the keys and chords do get you in your gut. That's the trick. That's the fact of it. It's just you don't know that that's what's doing it if you're not trained.
Well, I tend to obsess over certain moments in these songs that are moments. It's like I only know when he, and this is a gesture, and that is what gets me. It is as localized as that. I mean, when I was a child, I'm sure it wasn't. But when I was a child, I saw The Sound of Music when I was 4, the film, and that was the gut moment. And so every Saturday afternoon for the rest of that year, my mother drove me to town and bought me another musical to watch. So that's what happened. And I particularly loved Fred Astaire at that point. So I quickly went backwards from The Sound of Music and My Fair Lady into Top Hat and The Bandwagon, which is still my favourite.
The Bandwagon.
Yeah, I love The Bandwagon. What are you
No,
looking
I'm
at
just
me
curious.
Like,
I never heard that.
I love The
I
Bandwagon.
asked this because this afternoon I was at Encores watching the first work-through of the first scene of Brigadoon.
Mm-hmm.
And we listened with Jack Vertel, who was the Encore's artistic director, to the Heather on the Hill. And we said to each other, Richard, what is it about Lerner and Loewe that is something other than Rodgers and Hammerstein?
Mm-hmm.
Rodgers was stentorian. He was brilliant melodist. No one's going to take it away from him. But you listen to people who say we're in love, and you think it's bum, 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 bum. You know, it's important. It's powerful. And then you listen to the Heather on the Hill.
And you just
and what could Loewe do? Da-dum, 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 da-da. There's a grazioso in Loewe that didn't exist anywhere else in what we know as the golden age of musical theater.
That sounds like an academic response too.
Well, I don't want to be that. It's what we're all here today because we love this stuff.
But that's what I meant by finesse. It's the fact that there's so much detail in everything. And when Lerner does a bad word in a lyric, it stands out because the rest of it is so finesse. And it's the same with the music. You know, there are occasional songs where you think, you know, that this move isn't quite convincing or there's something, and it stands out because of the fluency of everything else. And I think that that's what's unusual, just the working of it. And there is something slightly higher about it as well, but not high in a Weill sense or a Bernstein sense where they're showing off what they can do. With Loewe, it's kind of sincere, isn't it?
It's romantic.
Yes,
It is
It
romantic.
touches our heart.
No, I know, it makes me cry. I mean, that's the good news, is it makes me cry. And let me tell you, practicing on Wall Street made me cry for other reasons, but not for those. So anyway, so anything else, or we can, yeah.
Can you just tell me a little bit about their personalities and how they, just as human beings, working together?
Yeah, they were really very different.
Did you ever meet either of them?
I guess I met Loewe when I was a little kid.
It's funny how
but,
unmemorable it is.
Yeah, well.
But you
know,
remember
there was
Julie
some-
Stein at the New Year's Eve party, right?
Yeah, that's true, but that was a little more present, and it happened a lot.
What a miserable life.
But Loewe, I don't know actually, and maybe Dominic knows more about how he was when he was working at the piano, but he was really a hedonist once he became successful, and he didn't want to work as hard. And Lerner was quite driven, and so Lerner wanted to work all the time. Loewe didn't want to go out to Hollywood, which Lerner did, and so they worked, as we said, they worked together very closely on both the words and the music and the lyrics. But
Lerner loved being a celebrity.
Lerner
I think
loved
this is
being
the
a
major
celebrity,
difference
yeah.
between them.
Right,
That
and-
Lerner loved being Alan J. Lerner, and Loewe just
Loewe
liked
loved
the work and the money.
the work, the money,
Because we-
and women and gambling,
Yeah,
which is what the work got him.
yeah.
And so he loved to go to the Riviera, and he would disappear for long periods of time and go gambling and womanizing.
Yeah. But it's interesting, we were listening to the talk back at the end of the My Fair Lady session tapes, some of which is on the CD of My Fair Lady, and Loewe is the only person that won't come and say anything, so that he's not part of the message to the world. So
Yeah,
you
he
get
just-
Julie Andrews, and you get Rex Harrison, you get a bit of Lerner, and you get...
It's really hard to write a biography of Loewe because he just wasn't
He was
making
reluctant.
a lot of noise. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that people frequently talk about with different sets of lyricists and composers is music first or lyrics first, and I guess you just were referring to very tightly back and forth, but could you describe more?
Sure. Well, there are songs that were trunk songs where they got them out and stuck them in their shows, but most of the time they were very book driven with their writing, as far as I can tell. And so the earliest documents of the scores for these Lerner and Loewe musicals are always outlines of the shows with where the songs are going to appear and what they're going to be about. So
And Lerner would come up with a title.
and then Lerner would come up with a title, and they would agree on what the title would be, and then they would supposedly both sit in a room while Loewe would improvise around this title, and they would sort of come to some consensus about what they liked or not, and then Loewe would write it down and give it to Lerner to go and add lyrics to. So Loewe's process was quite often very quick comparatively, and although writing the melody down was the main bit of the process, because Lerner could read music, that made this process quite particular. So Lerner had a musical opinion in a way that might not have been the case with other Broadway lyricists, because he could actually say what an augmented seventh is and recognize it and kind of have some understanding of
And an
the
opinion about it.
associations of it.
Yeah.
And would have a sense of whether the character of something musically was what he was looking for, I guess, dramatically. But then Lerner would often take forever to then go and write the lyrics, and he was very open, and he writes in his memoir very self-critically about the quality of his lyrics, and he hates the line, "Why all at once my heart took flight," in "I Could Have Danced All Night," and said, "To this day it gives me cardiac arrest." And I think he is rather misunderstood in this sort of respect, that because he was a celebrity, he was assumed to have an ego, which he clearly did, but not at the expense of having some kind of self-awareness too, that he was probably his biggest critic. And actually the lyrics book will hopefully reveal that, because it's 632 pages of different workings of all these lyrics, and that has been the main aim of the book, is to actually try and provide a reassessment of him by revealing how hard he worked, because he has this reputation of not being serious, I think. And similarly, Loewe, because he wasn't keen on celebrity, there isn't enough of a paper trail about him. But at least we will have the critical editions. And actually, one thing we didn't mention was the key thing about the critical editions is they will both become available for rental, but also be published in full score, which is fairly unusual for Broadway musical orchestral scores.
Yeah.
So again, they will become sort of more permanent and available to people, and students will be able to buy them and look at them and see them in libraries. So I think that's where we are with Lerner Loewe at the moment.
Anyway.
Yes.
Will the additional section of You Did It be used in the new Broadway production?
Which additional section?
Her blood, he said, is bluer than the Danube is or ever was.
As far as I know, at the moment, yes. I mean, going back an hour to our conversation about productions being living things and it belonging to the performers and the creative team of that production, they're not in rehearsal yet. So, the intention is to do everything at the moment, and we're going to fight to the death for that.
But it's very long.
But it's very long, and there may be specific reasons why they don't want to do it. Who knows? But hopefully they will do it.
Anyway. So,
Yes.
I think when you were introduced, something was mentioned about an ongoing project here with Lerner and Loewe.
Oh, the ongoing project is this critical edition project.
But something especially here at HB, did you say?
Oh, Edith, yes, what we've done is over the past, I think it's probably been 3 years, we've been helping to fund a Lerner and Loewe set of master classes and scenes into song classes that have been being done, and lab classes, which we're just really pleased
again,
about.
It's an investment in trying to get to new generations of performers, because the stuff is not known, sadly.
You have no idea the number of times I say, "Hi, I'm Emily Altman, president of the Frederick Loewe Foundation," and people look at me completely blankly. So I might say Lerner and then sometimes they say, "Oh yeah,"
But most people my age wouldn't know who Lerner and Loewe were.
no, that's
And
absolutely
possibly not Rodgers and Hammerstein.
right. So sometimes I then say My Fair Lady, and then but I have to keep working at it. So. Then I start singing. No, I'm kidding. That doesn't help.
It's been a joke all day that Emily is
help.
threatening to have singing lessons, so I see that you're actually serious.
I'm serious.
Okay, good.
Okay. Thank you all.
Yes, it's been really, thank you, everyone.